Alright, if you take a look at the early days of the channel, I'm talking like early days of the channel, I did a video where I went through and looked at all of the comic book adaptations of Mario. And he actually had a ton. I was really surprised. But at the same time, I kind of wasn't surprised because comic books for decades have been a great medium to adapt other media into, because it's still very visual, it's still very engaging, it's relatively cheap to make a comic book comparative to other things, and it's been going on for decades. It's been a tradition that has just worked. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit sidetracked. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because in that Mario video, I talked about a manga series that was released in Japan almost exclusively called Super Mario-Kun. Now, the purpose of this book was that it adapted all of the Mario games into these wide, expansive stories. Nintendo's not a stranger to this idea. They've been adapting their video game franchises into comic books for forever. Most notably, and probably the most recognizable one, is The Legend of Zelda. Almost every Zelda game has had a very expansive manga series that doesn't just tell the story of the game, but expands it in a big way. Now, that's Nintendo's big storytelling franchise. They're famous for saying that Zelda is the storytelling franchise. What about Mario? Well, in Japan, they've had this series. I've really wanted to read it, but it was only released in Japan. And I can't read Japanese, so I didn't even try to bother, especially since I'd have to import all of these volumes, and I don't want to deal with that hassle. It was translated into French, though. And same problem. I don't want to order a French book, and I can't read French. But this was cool. I was out shopping for comics as I do, as you probably expect I do quite often. And I found this just hanging out there in the middle of Barnes & Noble. Super Mario Manga Mania. This is the English translation of the book. Sort of. This right here is kind of a sampler of the various stories that you could expect from the close to 2 decades that this series has been going on in Japan. They picked various chapters from various games. Most of them are from Sunshine. Some of them are from Super Paper Mario. There is a couple from a few other games. And I'm really excited to dig into this and read it and find out, what have I been missing? What has America been missing this entire time? So I'm going to go ahead and go read it, and then I'll come back and let you know how it goes. So until I finish reading it, here's a little bit of history and a little bit of background as to what this book is and where it comes from and what it's doing. Super Mario-Kun is written by Yukio Sawada, and it's been published in various different magazines starting in 1990, but got its own volume starting in 1991. It retells various Mario games throughout its runtime, throughout its series, and even creates some original scenarios that don't appear in any kind of game. Along the way, they would add some puzzles like mazes and find the hidden object kind of things, so it tried to be interactive that way as well. Now, it turns out that this volume that I got, this actually isn't as new as I was expecting it to be. It was released in 2020, and then last year, 2023, as of this recording, they released a second volume. It was called Super Mario-Kun Special Selection, they made a remake of the first chapter of the series, which is pretty neat. That's a lot of work to go through. But at this current time, it has 60 volumes related to it. The 60th volume is the first part of an adaptation of Super Mario Bros. Wonder. And then 61 is on its way, and that's going to be adapting Super Mario Bros. Wonder, the second part of it, to finish that up. And it's even going to adapt some of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. That one I'm actually really interested to see. I'm interested to see how this book will adapt the movie, especially since this part of the video I'm recording after the rest of the part, and I know what I'm in for. Oh, look at that. I just finished the book. Let's go ahead and see how I'm doing. I was woefully unprepared for what this book had in it. Wow, this book was so weird. And it never stopped being weird. And I didn't understand any of it. This book is a gag comedy. It's a billion jokes a minute, and it just never slows down. But beyond that, I was just kind of shocked at some of the jokes here. There's definitely a cultural barrier, I think, to what's going on here. Because, like, just within, like, the first couple of pages here, guys, we have this incident where Mario is talking to this fish. I forget what the fish is called. Somebody can tell me what the fish is called. But he's talking to this fish, and he's like, wow, it's so hot. I'm so thirsty, because they're at a lava level, right? And the fish is like, here, have a nice fresh glass of water. Oh, thanks a lot. Glug, 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 delicious. Can I get some too? Just a moment. And the fish spits into the cup. And Mario was like, bleh, that's super gross. Because it is. That is very, very gross. But then, what happens next? What happens next is he's all like, where did you get that water? My own personal stash, of course. It comes out the other end too. And then he pees on Mario. But then he's like, oh, I feel so much better. Let's a go-go, he says. Look at Mario go. Psst, it's actually an energy drink. Why? I'm just so confused by... it's like, it's not even confusing. It's just gross. And it's not that funny. But, like, that's like the whole book, is that they have weird humor like that. There's 10 stories in here. 9 of them are that same kind of comedy. And then there's one that takes things a little bit more seriously, but we'll talk about that in a second, because there's a lot to dive into that one with. But all 9 of these stories have that same kind of humor going for them. It's a lot of puns, which, by the way, puns? They use a lot of puns in here, and I'm amazed. Because puns don't really work as well outside of their native language, but somehow most of them work in here, unless there were some that I just didn't catch. I cannot imagine how hard it must have been to translate some of these jokes from Japanese into English in a way that made sense for English readers. But on top of that, it had a lot of the same kind of gross out humor, very lowbrow. And I think it might just be a cultural thing, because in the back of the book, Yukio Sawada talks a little bit about how he came to make this manga, how he came up with the concepts for it and how it should read, how it should look and feel. He mentioned that his inspiration was a TV show that he loved to watch and how that would approach the Mario canon. And so that's where the comedy comes from. And if that's a popular show in Japan, then I can see how this would make a lot of sense over there, but that's not the kind of humor we get here in the States. Our comedy is a lot slower. It's a lot more methodical, and it's a lot less jokes per minute. Like, probably the best examples of sketch comedy that kind of matches the kind of vibe I think this book is going to go for is something like Saturday Night Live or Studio C, one of those two, where they set up the joke and there's funny jokes along the way, but the major punchline of the joke doesn't happen until the end of the skit. And I don't think that really happens here. There's not enough time for any jokes to really bake, and he doesn't really bake a whole lot of them throughout the book either. The stories in here, they all do fit into any number of games, and they do define which games they're supposed to be a part of. And I think it does a pretty good job of keeping the environments and the characters, and it keeps the characters consistent, if not a little bit shallow. But the biggest thing that kind of turned me off from this, aside from the humor style, was the art. It's so busy. It's like nothing ever quite slows down here, and there's so much happening in every single panel. that it's a little bit hard to keep track of it all. Now, part of me was wondering maybe it's only hard to keep track of because it's in line art, and since everything is in line art and there's just lines going everywhere, maybe that's what's making it difficult. I've never done this before, but you know what? Some say this is a comic book, some say that this could be a coloring book. So I'm going to test that theory. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to color one of these stories here, see if that fixes it.
All right, so like it helped a little bit. But you know what? I actually just had a lot of fun coloring in some of the book. I think I'd actually recommend this. You know, if you have a cheap manga lying around and you're okay with killing any kind of resale value it has, this was quite cathartic. This was nice. This was fun. I recommend.
Yeah, not gonna lie, actually, that was actually really fun. That was a fun way to interact with this book. Yeah, that actually brought back a lot of the value for me. But now I'm going to go rewind to slightly past me to kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in that last story. But that's just 9 of the 10 stories. There's a 10th story in here called Super Mario-Kun. And this one came with a disclaimer in front of it. The stories in the following section deal with the passing of a parent. While this material is still within the ranges of an all ages rating, it may be upsetting for children who are sensitive to this kind of subject matter. We opted to include the stories here because they are part of the creator's original greatest hits, which he selected himself, but with permission of the creator, they've been moved the stories from where they were placed in the original Japanese volume to the back of this volume. And it's kind of a downer. So what happens is Luigi gets word that the princess has been kidnapped again, and so he goes to find Mario and finds out that Mario is at a hospital. And he's there because he's depressed and he's broken and he feels old. His hands hurt, his body hurts, everything hurts. And Luigi and Yoshi, they try their hardest to keep the slapstick comedy going. And while this is happening, while they're trying so hard to get Mario to wake up a little bit, we get some very personal messages from the author. It's not from a character. The author interjects and starts narrating and talking a little bit about what's going on with this particular story. It says, "Sometimes I think about this one comic I wrote long ago. I worked on it when my father was really sick in the hospital. Even so, I had no choice but to fill the comic with jokes and gags and tomfoolery. My father ended up passing away. And still, I wrote a story about Papa Blooper doing his best." And he relates like this older comic in here, and then that older comic was about his dad, and then this one is about how he's feeling. And everyone around him is trying to be funny. Everyone around Mario is trying to be funny, but Mario just... the slapstick is just happening to him. He's not really reacting. Until Dr. Mario shows up from 25 years in the future and gives current Mario a pill, and then current Mario perks up and the jokes start flowing again. Not like that story, and that was probably this part of the book, this last story here, is easily my favorite part of this book because it feels so human and it feels so real. We get to see the author just bare his raw soul in this book, and he's like being secretly critical of how he's forced to be silly and funny while he's trying his hardest to just not fall apart. And wow. Look, I didn't get the humor of the book. I didn't get the story structure of the book. I frankly didn't love it. But this last story, this meant something, and this was fantastic. I'm so glad that Mr. Sawada was so open to sharing something so personal in this volume with us, because that right there, I think, is worth its weight. So, between that last story just being so humanizing and it's so real and raw, it was beautiful in a way. Between that and the fact that it is Mario, and that I just had a heck of a lot of fun coloring in that one page, I would say, yeah, this book would be worth it to you if it's something that's in like that category for you. If you like Mario like a lot, or if you like manga a lot, or if you're really into that kind of Japanese humor, then I think this book will mean a lot for you. This will be fun. And I kind of hope that this does succeed, because this is just a sampler, as I mentioned before, of what did it say? Like 66 volumes, 56 volumes of Super Mario just existing and having a manga series that's been that ongoing and long running. That's nuts, guys. That's huge. And that's a huge backlog, and I would love it if I could see all of that become translated and brought over here to the States. Though, at the same time, there is a lot of cultural difference here, and I don't know if that will happen. But, if you think it might, if you think some of this humor might be worth it to you, go ahead and check out the book. I would recommend it to you. So that's what I got for you guys today. I want to know what your favorite Mario game is. Mine is Super Mario Galaxy. I love Mario Galaxy. Galaxy is so good. This is my favorite. But I want to hear about your favorite. Go ahead and tell me in the comments below, and until next time, thank you for joining me. Have a great day, and remember to always be your best self.